So let's talk about First Peter. We are so close to being done with the entire New Testament. We're going to be done with the New Testament early in January. We are now midway into. It's insane. It's unbelievable. We're so close. First Peter is going to go super fast. Second Peter super fast. Jude is going to go unbelievably quickly. And then there we are in Revelation. And we're going to be in Revelation for, I think, about a month and a half. But I'm so excited. It's awesome. But let's talk about First Peter. So, the book of First Peter was written by exactly who you probably think. It was written by the Apostle Peter. Now, that is actually something that there is a little bit of debate over among some scholars, right? There are scholars out there who believe that the book of First Peter was written by someone else and then was just written in Peter's name, that it was written by someone who was claiming the name of Peter to try to use his authority as a way of getting people to believe their message. That's the same kind of thing that we saw with First Timothy, what some scholars say about First Timothy, what some scholars say about Second Timothy, Titus, and a few of the other letters by Paul. They say the same thing about First Peter. They say that the Greek is too good for an uneducated fisherman like the historical apostle Peter, and therefore a book with Greek this polished, Greek this sophisticated, could not possibly have been written by this uneducated Jewish fisherman, this kind of proletariat, this lower class, blue collar, working class, mostly unschooled fisherman Peter. He would have had the very basic schooling that Jewish children, Jewish boys would have had, but nothing else. And as a result, they say it's really unlikely that the real Peter actually wrote this. But there's a major problem with that, and that is that this is not some mostly unknown fact. This is not some kind of hidden thing that nobody knows about. This is really common knowledge. This is really simple. This is really straightforward. It is a widely known fact that in the first century, and just in the ancient world in general, the Jewish people were among the best educated in the world, and that includes the least educated Jews. The least educated Jews were often better educated than moderately well-educated Gentiles. The Jewish people, because of the fact that the God of the universe had made them his people and called them to learn his will and his ways, to learn his commands, had divinely inspired these sacred writings that we find in the Old Testament. As a result, they put a huge emphasis on the ability to read and in some cases, the ability to write. And they placed a huge emphasis on education, learning philosophy, learning logic, learning all these different things to make it so that more of them than in any other culture would be able to think reasonably well, read reasonably well, speak reasonably well, just work through issues reasonably well. Why? Because it was important to them for people to be able to understand, wrestle with, work through, process, and interpret the divinely inspired Word of God. Whether they could physically read it or not, they wanted them to be able to chew on it and understand it. So literacy was higher among Jews than in any other people group for the most part at that point in time. And then just basic understanding of things like logic, philosophy, and how to interpret ideas and stuff like that was more common with ancient Jews than almost any other people group. And along with that was the fact that first century Jews were typically multilingual. Typically, they spoke at least 2 or 3 languages, and that included often the least educated among them. They would primarily speak Aramaic in most cases if they lived in a part of the Promised Land that was largely Jewish, so like Galilee, what we call Palestine now as well, would have predominantly spoken Aramaic, but they would have also spoken at least some Hebrew so that they could understand the Hebrew text of the scriptures. A lot of them would also have spoken Koine Greek. That was the form of Greek that was spoken throughout the Roman Empire at that point in time. It's kind of how, like, for a very long time, English was sort of the language of just about every area. The British Empire had conquered so much of the world and imposed the English language on so much of the world. So just about anywhere you went, there was a very good chance that at the very least the moderately educated people spoke English. In the same way, just about anywhere you went in the Roman Empire, at least the moderately educated people would have spoken Koine Greek, which is kind of the primary language of the Greco-Roman empires. So even a poor fisherman in Galilee would have spoken definitely Aramaic, probably at least some Hebrew, and very likely Koine Greek as well, the same Greek that this was written in. And it's not at all shocking that an intelligent blue-collar fisherman would be able to speak relatively good Greek, pretty polished, pretty sophisticated Greek, just like this. At exactly the same time, though, Peter says that he is writing this with a man named Silvanus. We'll talk about who Silvanus was in just a second, but Silvanus was probably what we call his amanuensis. We've talked about this. Just like with Paul, so many of his letters were transcribed by one of his ministry partners. And that day and age, an amanuensis wasn't just writing your exact words. Often they were taking what you said and they were polishing it a little bit. They were cleaning it up a little bit. They were making it a little neater, a little tidier, a little bit clearer. And so, could very easily have cleaned up Peter's words so that they're a little bit more polished and sophisticated in Koine Greek. Heck, Peter could have been speaking in Aramaic, or he could have been speaking in Hebrew, and Silvanus could have translated it into Greek because that was the primary language of the empire. And so a lot of the people at the churches he's writing to would have spoken that. So it's entirely possible that he didn't actually write it in Greek. He wrote it in Aramaic or Hebrew, and then Silvanus translated it into Koine Greek. That is totally possible. Some scholars actually argue that there are some signs that this was originally a Hebrew letter, that there's some kind of turns of phrases that are common in Hebrew, not Greek, that are, kind of into Greek. And so, scholars believe that actually Peter probably did originally, when he recited this, it was and then Silvanus just translated it into Greek. That is a distinct possibility, but Silvanus was his amanuensis. He was kind of transcriber, almost like his secretary. I can't remember what the name, like court something, person in court who writes down everything that happens, like similar sort of to that. He was the amanuensis, but he was also the courier and maybe also even his co-writer. So he probably helped Peter write this, right? So some of these ideas are probably also Silvanus's ideas, not just Peter's ideas. He would have written down what Peter said and then put it to some extent into his own words, cleaned up the language and polished it a little bit with his maybe superior grasp on Greek. And then he would have delivered it to the churches that Peter was writing it to. And then he would have stayed there with those churches for several weeks, maybe even several months. In some cases, as we've seen, like with Paul and some of his ministry partners, even several years. He could have stayed with these churches for several years until Peter could come to be physically with them. What would he have been doing while he stayed with those churches? Same thing Phoebe was doing when she delivered to the Romans. Same thing all of Paul's couriers were doing when they delivered his letters. He would have stayed there and taught through the letter. He would have been a teacher to them to make sure they understand the letter, to make sure they understand everything Peter is saying, everything Peter is talking about, everything Peter is trying to explain to them. Silvanus would have explained to the churches that he is writing to make sure they could understand it and could apply it to their life and mission together. And very likely he would have been there to help them through at least the first round or two of copying the letter down, right? Listening to him read off the letter, making copies of that letter and sending it out to other churches so that they can read what the Lord has said through his servant Peter too. Peter says, with the help of Silas, whom I regard as a faithful brother, I have written to you briefly, encouraging you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. He says, Silas or Silvanus helped me to write this. Now, who was Silvanus? Silvanus was a leader in the early church in Jerusalem. So he would have been actually a partner with Peter leading the Jerusalem church very early on alongside James and the other disciples. He eventually joined Paul's missionary journeys to give him legitimacy, right? To give Paul this sense of legitimacy. Silas Silvanus was associated with Peter, James, and the rest of the apostles. So many people were suspicious of Paul, remember that? And so if one of the associates of the apostles themselves goes with Paul on his missionary journeys to each of the churches, then those churches are much more likely to trust Paul. It'll give Paul legitimacy. So Silvanus went with Paul. Peter and James and the other apostles said, Silvanus, you go with Paul and help Paul on his journey. Help him with the churches that he's planting and churches that he's kind of helping break out of false teaching and other things like that. Give him legitimacy among the Jewish churches there and help him. So at one point, Silvanus was with Paul, and we know that because some of Paul's own letters were co-written with Silvanus and delivered by Silvanus too. You might remember that from some of our earlier videos. But there's a handful of things we know about Silvanus. Was famous for being gifted with the gift of prophecy, right? The Lord very frequently spoke through Silvanus directly to his people in the churches. That was a gifting of prophecy. We know that he was a Roman citizen, and as a Roman citizen, he would have almost certainly been well educated, and just like Peter, he would have been bilingual, but probably Silvanus's bilingual skills are way past Peter's. Peter is an uneducated fisherman who still would likely have been bilingual as a first century Jew, but Silvanus is a full-on Roman citizen, so he probably has a much greater education than Peter would have had, and so his Greek skills are probably even better than Peter. So if he is Peter's amanuensis and he is polishing Peter's language, that is another very good reason why the pretty sophisticated and polished Greek does not mean that the uneducated Jewish fisherman Peter could not have written it. But his name, Silvanus, is a Hellenized name that is a kind of Greekified name, which means that he was probably a Hellenistic Jew. So he was probably a Jew from a Greek-speaking background. Greek was probably his primary language. Greek was his first language. Aramaic or Hebrew may have been his second or third languages. So he is a primarily Greek speaker. And that might mean that he's from a Greek background city. That might mean that he is from one of the Greek colonies throughout the Roman Empire. We don't know exactly when he came to faith. He may have been converted during the original earthly ministry of Jesus, or he may have come to faith during Pentecost. There's a lot of early traditions that say Silvanus became a Christian at Pentecost, that he was visiting Jerusalem from his Greek-speaking colony to celebrate the festival of Pentecost, and he heard Peter preaching and teaching the gospel, became a follower of Jesus, and never looked back. We don't know the exact situation, but all we know is that this is written by Peter and Silvanus, and it is written to a group of churches that are going through some very specific. So what is the situation? There's a lot for us to say here, but the big picture is this. Peter is writing to the churches he has a relationship with. He's writing to a very specific series of churches throughout Asia Minor. He's writing to the same grouping of churches that was writing to in 1 Timothy and Titus, the same grouping of churches that we're going to see writes to in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. I think I actually forgot to mention them earlier. I was listing out the rest of the book before Revelation, but you know what I mean. Writing to these persecuted churches throughout Asia Minor. He says, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So that includes the Ephesian church. That includes so many of the other churches. These are the churches in Asia Minor, kind of modern day Turkey. So many of the letters that are written that are at the end of the New Testament Many of them are addressed specifically to Ephesus or the rest of the churches in Asia Minor. It's really interesting. It seems like there's a lot of really specific, really difficult stuff happening there that kind of forced Paul and Peter and John and others to really zero in on these churches and guide them through some really bizarre situations that now we benefit from through the divinely inspired writings that the Lord moved them to write to help shepherd these churches through the struggles that they were going through. Now, these churches that he's writing to, they are predominantly Gentile. We know that because he says, once you were not a people, now you are God's people. So you used to not be God's people, but now you are God's people. Once upon a time, you were not part of God's people. You were not part of Israel. You were not part of his kingdom or his family or his covenant people, but now you are part of all of these things. You have become the people of God. He says you were liberated from the futile ways inherited from your ancestors. Specifically, that term that he's using, the ancestors, he's not just talking about you were descended from, he's talking about your Gentile ancestors, your pagan ancestors, the futile ways that he mentions here. He's talking about the futile ways of the Gentile world, the futile ways of the pagan world. He's saying you grew up in a setting surrounded by false worship of false gods, with lives defined by wickedness, the kinds of wickedness that you see in the Gentile world, in the pagan world, the kinds of wickedness that are not acceptable in the Jewish world. You didn't grow up with that moral guidance that comes from the Jewish faith. You didn't grow up with that kind of baseline moral guidance that comes from growing up in the Hebrew culture. You didn't have the advantage of growing up Israelite, growing up Jewish, growing up Hebrew. Paul says in Romans that it was an advantage to grow up as part of the nation of Israel. Being Jewish does not save you. Being Hebrew does not redeem you. Being ethnically descended from Abraham, being part of the nation of Israel, that does not make you part of God's people, but it absolutely gives you an advantage in that you have grown up hearing about the one true God, hearing the prophecies that point towards Jesus, and you've grown up with that just baseline guidance on who God is, what he is like, he wants for us and from us, his will and his ways, how to live. That comes from having grown up with the divinely inspired writings of Moses and the prophets and the kings and so forth. And growing up in that culture, he says, you didn't have that advantage. You grown up enmeshed in futile ways, pagan ways from your pagan ancestors. You were not part of God's people, but now you are God's people. And he says, now, because you have left behind the futile ways of your ancestors, you have a problem. Because you have walked away from the wickedness that you were indoctrinated into growing up as pagan Gentiles, you have a problem, a practical problem. And that is that your culture no longer loves you. Your country no longer loves you. Your people no longer love you. Your ancestors no longer love you. The people who share your ethnic heritage have rejected you. The people who share your national identity have rejected you. Why have they rejected you? Because they are rebels against the king, but you now are citizens of the kingdom, children of the king, the beloved of King Jesus. He says, you have put yourself in the crosshairs of Babylon. Paul is writing from his home church, his home base in Rome. And we know that because he says, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you her greetings, as does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. He says, the rest of the people in Babylon greet you. Is he literally in Babylon? No, he is not. He is in Rome. Why does he say he's in Babylon when he's literally in Rome? It's because we've talked about this before, but the early Christians referred to Rome as Babylon. Book of Revelation, when it talks about Babylon, when he gives all these visions of Babylon the Great doing these things, it's not a mystery. We're not supposed to try to figure out who Babylon is. He's talking about Rome. Rome is Babylon. The early Christians referred to Rome as Babylon, but they didn't just refer to Rome as Babylon. They referred to every oppressive empire as Babylon. We talked about this in the video on 2 Thessalonians, I believe. Wicked empire who opposes the true king is Babylon. Every wicked empire who oppresses the citizens of God's kingdom is Babylon. Every wicked empire that conquers the people of God is Babylon. Every wicked empire that tries to draw the people of God away from God's truth, God's will, God's ways, that tries to draw God's people into sin, into rebellion, into disobedience, into falsehood, is Babylon. And in the same way, every ruler over these empires, they refer to as Babylon, or they refer to as some other name. They call them the man of lawlessness, or they could call them the beast. They could call them whatever. So, wicked world power or world system that opposes the Lord and his people is Babylon. Any wicked ruler who opposes the Lord and his people is the man of lawlessness, is the beast, is so on and so forth. He says, the rest of the believers in Babylon send their greetings. So I'm writing from Babylon. I'm writing from the big wicked empire ruled by the man of lawlessness, ruled by the beast who opposes the Lord and oppresses the Lord's people, who tries to draw the Lord's people away from the truth. Babylon. He says, when you left behind the futile ways inherited from your ancestors, Babylon became your enemy and the beast became your enemy. The man of lawlessness became your enemy. When you became part of God's people, Babylon became your enemy. The beast, the man of lawlessness, became your enemy. This wicked kingdom and its wicked rulers became your enemy. And so now you are being persecuted. This was one of the most intense periods of persecution in the history of the church. This was the persecutions most likely under the Emperor Nero. The reign of the Emperor Nero, the Christians in Asia Minor, so places like Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia especially, were mercilessly tormented, tortured, beaten, attacked. They were experiencing brutal persecutions, and the result was that so many of the Christians in the churches in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, and so forth, Asia Minor, were abandoning King Jesus in order to get Babylon, the beast, the man of lawlessness, Nero, to stop persecuting them. We see more of this when we get into Revelation. Early Christians referred to Nero with a really specific nickname. Referred to him sometimes as 666. Again, it's not a mystery. It's not telling us to figure out who the future guy is going to be when it uses that. That's literally the number that they used to describe Nero. You calculated the numerical value of the letters in Neron Caesar, or it came out to 666. When you calculated it according to Nero Caesar, it came out to 616. And so interestingly enough, some manuscripts of Revelation use the number 666, others use 616, but ironically, actually, those were both common numerical terms that early Christians and Jews used to refer to this beast, this man of lawlessness, Nero. They were experiencing this brutal persecutions under the beast Nero, the man of lawlessness Nero, the 666 figure Nero. Some of them were abandoning King Jesus just to find relief. Others were just succumbing to despair. They were just losing their hope. They were even, some of them, losing their faith because they could not wrap their head around why is the Lord allowing us to suffer this much for this long. And so they're asking Peter, why are we suffering so much? Why is the Lord allowing us to suffer so much? And what should we do now? What should we do about these relentless persecutions? What should we do about these relentless sufferings? How do we endure these gut-wrenching sufferings? And so Peter jumps in and he tackles that question head on in a way that really opens up the curtain for us and gives us a really beautiful and really clear glimpse at the big picture, plan, and purpose that God is working out in history, that he's working out in our lives, and that he's working out in the struggles that we go through day in and day out as his people. He says, why are you suffering so much, and what should you do about it? The answer is very simple, but it's maybe kind of shocking. It's maybe a little bit different from what we've grown up hearing in the church. Because Peter says, you are suffering the way that you are because we live in the last times. We live in the last days. We live in the last hour. We live in the last age. Your translation may put it any of these different ways, but it all means the same basic thing. What is he talking about when he says we live in the last days? He's saying we live in the age where God's eternal plan of redemption is being fulfilled. He says we live in the age where God's history-long plan to redeem humanity is being fulfilled through Christ. We live in the age where his plan and purpose that began before the foundation of the world to restore all things is being fulfilled through Christ. He says, we are in the age that is ultimately going to conclude with King Jesus returning, King Jesus pouring out his good, righteous judgment on all the living and the dead, that ends with King Jesus restoring all of creation fully and finally and forever to make everything good again, everything beautiful again, everything perfect again. But throughout this age that leads to that, in the meantime, we are going to be under spiritual attack from the fallen and broken world every single day of our lives until his glorious return. We are going to be under attack from the world in rebellion against the true King every single day of our lives until that glorious return. We are going to be under attack by the devil and the forces of darkness every single day until his glorious return. Peter says, you are the citizens of the true King. Therefore, you will spend this life on this earth, in this fallen, broken world, in rebellion, under constant attack from the false usurper, serpent king. And the way that attack is going to play out is through the attacks of the people around you. He says that is what life will be like during this last age, these last days, these last times. You are living in the end times. And the result is that this fallen, broken world, under the deception of the false usurper, serpent king, has painted a target on your back, declared open season on you. He says Christ was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. And so he says, listen, God's plan and purpose from before this world was even created was to redeem this world. God's purpose from before this world even existed was to redeem you. His purpose was not to leave you in your brokenness. It was to rescue you. It says, before God even created you, he knew, because he is all-knowing, that you were going to rebel against him. But he said, I am not going to abandon you. because of your rebellion. He said, I am going to give my life. I'm going to pour out my blood to save, redeem, and restore you. He knew before he created this world that we were going to rebel against him, that we were going to crown the serpent instead of crowning him. And yet he said, I am not going to destroy you because you joined the wrong king. I'm going to give myself fully in order to redeem and restore you. That has been God's plan since the purpose, since the very beginning. God knew that in order to create you, he would have to suffer. He would have to die. He would have to be tortured. God knew that creating you at all meant suffering more than we could possibly ever imagine. And he said, it's worth it. He said, I will suffer however much I need to in order to create you and then redeem you. I will bleed however much I need to in order to create you and redeem you. I will be bruised. I will be battered. I will be humiliated. I will be spit on. I will be mocked. However much I need to in order to create you. We must understand this if we want to understand the heart of God. God knew fully. It was not a surprise. He didn't have to pivot when we rebelled. No, he knew that to create us was to suffer. The decision to create you and I was the decision to go to the cross in our place. God was not going to create a people that he would ultimately have to abandon and destroy. No. God created us knowing he would have to redeem us, and that to redeem us, he would have to come down from heaven, go to the cross in our place, and suffer immensely. He says that has always been part of the plan. But we get the glorious privilege of living in the day and age when that plan comes to fruition, comes to fulfillment. He says, Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous one for the unrighteous many, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. Then he was resurrected and has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. He said, we live in the glorious day and age in which Christ has come and he has suffered for our sins. He says, because Christ suffered, your sin is gone. Because Christ suffered, your unrighteousness was done away with. Because Christ, the righteous one, suffered for you, the unrighteous many. Now you are counted as righteous. Now the wall between you and God has been knocked down. Now you have been brought to God. Jesus picked you up, put you on his shoulder, and he literally carried you to God. There is nothing standing between you and God today. God looks at you not as a sinner worthy of condemnation. He looks at you as a saint worthy of reward. And he treats you as if you were absolutely perfect, the way that Jesus is absolutely perfect, as if you had never sinned, just as Jesus never sinned. He looks at you as if you had always obeyed, just like Jesus always obeyed. And he has welcomed you into his presence, welcomed you into his throne room, welcomed you into his living room, welcomed you into his love. There is nothing standing between you and God anymore. Instead, now you have God's presence with you at all times. You have God's presence in you at all times. He says he has given you the Holy Spirit. God himself now has taken up root in you. He has set up camp in you. And so you are literally every moment of your life in God's presence. He has brought you to God. Why are you now able to be in the presence of God, treated as a saint, not as a sinner? It's because of the gloriously good news that He has won the victory for you on the cross. And that gloriously good news is so glorious that Peter says that Jesus descended into the realm of the dead. He descended into Sheol. In the Apostles' Creed, the way that we put this is He descended into hell, or He descended into Hades. When it says that, it's not talking about hell in the sense of the place where you are separated from God. Literally just talking about the realm of the dead. Jesus went to the place where the dead dwell as they wait for the final judgment. As they wait for His return, He went to the imprisoned spirits. He went to the spirits who have rebelled against the Lord through the years. He went to where the angels who rebelled against Him, the angels that followed after the devil, when the devil rebelled, the angels who came down and so on and so forth during the days of Noah. We don't know exactly what he's talking about. There's a lot of different theories. It might be talking about Genesis chapter 6 when it says the sons of God, daughters of men, and they came and they took them as their brides and had with them who became the Nephilim, or the giant ones. There's a lot of different ways potentially to interpret passage, and it's not that important which of the interpretations you fall into, but it may be talking about that. Interpretation of that passage is that beings during the days of Noah, or like during kind of general time period, came and had children with human women somehow. Don't know how that works. That those children became kind of kingly figures in a lot of the different places where they lived, and that they were maybe larger than normal people, that they were the giant ones, essentially, that they were just massive and powerful and stuff. That may or may not be the best way to interpret that passage. It's a common way that the first century Jews interpreted it. A part of kind of interpretation that gets sort of expanded on in the non-biblical, not divinely inspired books of like the books of Enoch and Jubilees and so on and so forth. Kind of on that, they add some sort of like to it. Now those books are not presenting themselves as biblical books. They are not presenting themselves as divinely inspired. Enoch is not divinely inspired and does not pretend to be divinely inspired. Jubilees is not pretend to be divinely inspired. These are meant to be understood as fiction, almost like fiction, spiritual fiction, religious fiction. They're meant to be understood, kind of like the Left Behind books are, right? The Left Behind books are not claiming that the end times are actually going to be like that. They're not claiming that there's going to be a dude from the UN who is the Antichrist. They're not claiming that that stuff. They are fiction books that are just kind of on the general images in the book of Revelation and stuff like that. Kind of how the books of Eden, so on and so forth are. These are meant to be understood as kind of fiction. But they do give us a window into kind of a lot of the ancient Jews around the centuries leading up to the time of the New Testament saw a lot of this stuff. And basically the way that they put it is that these angelic creatures rebelled against the Lord, came, slept with human women, had these giant, called the Nephilim, and they were locked up. They were imprisoned as a result of it in the realm of the dead. So that could be what Peter's talking about here. It could just be a reference to the people in the realm of the dead who rebelled against the Lord, who are ultimately awaiting condemnation rather than redemption. We don't know, and it doesn't matter. But what did Jesus proclaim to them? He proclaimed, I have won the victory. I have brought redemption. I have brought salvation. I have put an end to this age of fallenness, this age of brokenness because of what I have done on the cross. Humanity is redeemed. Everyone who submits to me as their king, worships me as their God, throws themselves on my mercy as their savior, is redeemed the way that I have promised to redeem them. And the world will be restored just the way that I have promised to restore it. Everything will be made right because of what I have done on the cross. He proclaims that to the spirits imprisoned in the realm of the dead. And then when he finished proclaiming his victory to the people in the realm of the dead. He then rose from the grave. And then after he finished his resurrection work, he then ascended into heaven, sat down at the right hand of God, and now the angels and the principalities and the powers in the heavenly places, they kneel at his throne in submission to him. We live in the glorious age in which we get to see that fulfilled. He says in chapter 4, all will have to give an account to King Jesus, who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason, the gospel was preached even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards, or in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. The end of all things is near. Well, once again, Peter seems to be kind of alluding to the popular, common first century Jewish understanding of the realm of the dead and all these things. There are these spirits in the realm of the dead. They are waiting for the return of Jesus. They are waiting for the final judgment. They are waiting for the day when he comes to finish his work, take the throne of this world back for himself fully and finally. They're waiting for that day. And as they wait for that day, they're there in the realm of the dead. It says Jesus went to them and he proclaimed his victory. He proclaimed, I have finished what I promised on the cross. I have fulfilled what I promised on the cross. And now redemption is here. Humanity is redeemed. The world will be restored, and one day I will finish what I started. He says the cross was D-Day, but my second coming, my return, that will be V-Day, Victory Day. And he says, on that day I will raise you up, and everyone who has ever lived will face my judgment. I will pour out my mercy on those who submitted to me as their king, who worshiped me as their God, who threw themselves on my mercy as their savior. And I will pour out the just wrath, the righteous wrath, the holy wrath, the good wrath of a good God on everyone who has continued to rebel against my kingship and destroy the devil and the forces of darkness, cast them into the lake of fire forever. He says, that day is coming. That fulfillment is coming. That return is coming. And that will be a glorious day. That day will be beautiful. But every single day of our lives leading up to that day, we will be under relentless spiritual attack from the false usurper, serpent king, and this world that he holds captive. But this day is going to come to an end. And when this day comes to an end, when this last hour comes to an end, when these last days, this last age, when these end times come to an end, when he returns, it will make absolutely everything we've gone through here in this life, on this earth, in this fallen and broken world, in rebellion against its true king, worth it. He says another way to put this would be that you are suffering the way that you are right now because you are part of God's Israel. If you were watching the James videos, you've seen this. If you watched the Romans videos, you've seen this. If you watched, I think maybe the Ephesians video, we really dived into this. You've seen this, many of these, right? Because this is kind of running theme of the New Testament. But he says, you are part of the fulfillment of Israel. You are part of the true descendants of Abraham. He says, if you are a follower of King Jesus, you are an Israelite. Being ethnically Jewish does not make you an Israelite. Being by blood from Abraham does not make you an Israelite. He says being part of the geographical nation of Israel does not make you an Israelite. Actually, we dive deeper into this, I think, than anything else in the Hebrews videos. He says none of those physical things make you an Israelite. He says there is exactly one way to become an Israelite, to become part of God's covenant people, part of God's kingdom people, part of God's family, and that is following King Jesus. If you want to be part of the kingdom, you have to follow the king. If you want to be part of the covenant, you've got to worship the God of the covenant. If you want to be part of the family, you have got to embrace the father of the family. You've got to embrace the elder brother of the family. He says there's no such thing as being an Israelite while rejecting the God of Israel. And if you reject King Jesus, you reject the God of Israel. There's a myth that says that people who are of Judaism, people who practice the Jewish faith, they worship God the Father. They just don't worship the Son. No. You do not worship the Father if you reject the Son. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself. The God you're worshiping is not the Father. If you reject the Son, you are rejecting the God of the Old Testament. If you reject the Son, you are rejecting the God of Israel. If you reject the Son, you are not part of Israel. If you reject the Son, you are not a Jew. You literally are not genuinely Jewish. If you reject the Son, being part of the people of God, being part of Israel, being part of this covenant. It is not about your blood. It is about, do you serve and worship the God of Abraham? And if you reject Jesus, then you do not. This is very important because so many Christians have literally allowed the Jewish friends, family members, in-laws, and so forth to go to their grave and never once tried to introduce them to the God that they wrongly think they follow. If we fundamentally miss this, we will literally let people go to their graves separated from God. He says there is one way to be an Israelite, one way to be a Jew, one way to be part of God's Israel. And that is by following King Jesus. And he says, remember, these are predominantly Gentile, right? He says, you are not a people, but now you are God's people. He says, you inherited these futile pagan ways from your pagan ancestors. So these are people who are not ethnically Jewish, who have grown up serving pagan gods. But he says, you are God's people. He says, to God's elect, scattered at the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. The word elect, right? A lot of us, when we hear that word, because we hear the word elect and we think of the debate between non-Calvinists, but that's not what's happening here. He says, to God's elect. What is God's elect? It's just a word in the Old Testament that it used to refer to the people of God. If you are the people of God, then you are part of the elect. If you are part of God's family, you're part of the elect. If you're part of his kingdom, you're part of the elect. If you're a part of his people, you are part of the elect. It has nothing to do with, will versus, predestination. It's literally not even really a concept in Scripture. The passages that typically get cited in those debates, they're not about that. Elect is literally just a term that means Israel. So, he says, you are God's elect. You are God's Israel. You Gentiles who grew up enmeshed in paganism are God's Israel. You pagans, you former pagans, are God's people because you have thrown yourself on the mercy of Jesus to be your Savior. You have submitted yourself to Jesus as your King. You have worshiped Jesus as your God, and that makes you God's elect. That makes you God's people. That makes you God's Israel. He says in chapter 2, you are a chosen people. Remember, you pagans who once were not a people, you Gentiles who once were not a people, you Gentiles who once were pagan, you are a chosen people. The chosen people is not one ethnic group that now lives in a country in the Middle East that refers to itself as Israel because that is the name that the UN slapped on it. No! The chosen people is anyone, regardless of ethnicity, who follows King Jesus. He says, you are a royal priesthood. Who is the royal priesthood? Is it the poor ethnically descended from one guy 4,000 years ago? No! The royal priesthood is anyone who follows King Jesus, he says, you are a holy nation. Who is God's holy, set-apart nation? Is it the physical nation over in the Middle East that the U.S. government keeps saying they got to be able to do whatever they want? We got to give them as much money as they need. We got to give them as many treats as they need. We got to give them as many bombs as they need. Because they're the holy nation. No, the holy nation is anyone who follows King Jesus. He says, you are God's special possession. He is using the language God used in Exodus 19. In Exodus 19, after God brings Moses and the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, he says, if you will listen to my voice, I will make you my kingdom. He says, if you will listen to my voice, I will make you my kingdom of priests. I will make you my royal priesthood. If you will listen to my voice, I will make you my holy nation. If you will listen to my voice, I will make you my special possession. If you will listen to my voice, I will make you my chosen people. He says, now you, a bunch of mostly Gentiles, you are God's chosen people. You are God's royal priesthood. You are God's holy nation. You are God's special possession, so that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. He said, you are suffering this persecution because you are the fulfillment of Israel, living in a world that hates the God of Israel and therefore hates you because you are God's Israel. You are suffering and you are being persecuted because, as followers of King Jesus, you are the fulfillment of Israel, living in a world that has waged war on the God of Israel and therefore will wage war on God's Israel. Not wage war on a bunch of ethnically Jewish people, not wage war on a country that is in the borders of what used to be the old covenant nation of Israel, but you are Israel of God, living in a world that has waged war on the God of Israel, and that means that they will wage war on you. This world will wage war on you. And he says, therefore, do not be surprised when this world puts you through the ringer. Do not be surprised when this world makes you suffer, because following King Jesus as his kingdom people, as the true Israel of God, is painting a target on your back. The serpent king cannot win, and so he will spend every moment of these last days until his final destruction, waging a relentless, total war on the Israel of God, and that is you. We are going to leave it there for now, and we will pick it up in the next video as Peter dives into the question, how did you become part of God's fulfilled Israel? And what does being part of God's fulfilled Israel mean for you today? But between now and then, I love you guys. Take care and keep reading. Hey, what's up? It's Pastor Ryan from Mount Zion Baptist Church. I'm extremely glad that you watched our video, and I hope that the Lord used it to speak to you in a very powerful and specific way. Hit the like and subscribe buttons on this video so that you can keep up with everything that we put out and we come up a little bit higher in your algorithm, and send a personal message to our YouTube account. I would love to hear from you, get to know you, pray with you a little bit. Between now and then, take care, guys.